And we're live. Welcome to Open Bar Fantasy Baseball Podcast. It's Wednesday, June 10th, and that's significant, but we'll get to that in a little bit. I'm your host, Tony Tambo. We're here as always with Open Bar Ben, but with a very special guest, Toby at Batflip Crazy Podcast. You also collaborate with Bubba. It's Batflip and Bubba, and you're working on your own YouTube channel. Toby, thank you very much for being here, man. We appreciate it.
Yeah, Tony, it's awesome to be here. Thank you so much for having me, inviting me. It's always a lot of fun to talk baseball. I'm really excited and really appreciate you having me on and talking about the stuff. And I love the cool banner that's going for the YouTube people down there. So
awesome. It's like you've been through the ringer. Basically, it's like you just published a book or something. You've been doing all the podcasts with Little Baseball to talk about. So congrats to you.
Yeah, I love talking about baseball, fantasy baseball. Like I feel like, I don't know, there's just this huge void in what I would normally do. And so having the opportunity to chat baseball is something that I'm always looking forward to. And yeah. And people are nice enough to have me on and listen to my voice, even though I think they're probably getting tired of it by this point in time. So
it's a good voice, man.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's better than both of ours. We don't have the radio voice. Yours is much smoother and silkier.
Oh, well, thank you. I'll have to. Yeah, that's a very nice compliment because I've never really thought about my voice as being that nice, to be honest with you. Like you'd think doing a podcast, I'd be like, oh, I have a voice for a podcast or something like that. But it's just like, you want to know something? I really love talking and I really love talking about fantasy baseball. So let's do it. So I really appreciate that. You guys are already number one on my favorite podcast host list right now because of the nice things you're saying about me.
If it all goes downhill from here, we got that, Ben.
Yeah, right. That may be the highlight. That
for sure. You guys are going first in my MLB draft of fantasy baseball podcasters right now.
Well, thanks for the segue on that, Toby, because literally right as we speak, the MLB draft is going. We do know Spencer Torkelson, third baseman, Arizona State, went number 1 overall. We were kind of talking off air. I don't have much to say about the MLB draft. I'm not going to sit here and actually watch this. I'm gonna watch my guys and how my Cubbies see what they did later in the day, maybe this weekend or something like that. But I know a lot of guys, the Prospects Live guys, are going live right now. They're doing analysis as we speak. The Score Crow's doing it, and obviously the MLB channel, they're live streaming as well. So it's an exciting night for baseball as far as it gets in 2020.
For sure. Yeah, it's the most excitement baseball related, not talking about the KBO that we've had in a while. And I know already, it was already there's been some big surprises. I think I haven't been tracking it at all, like the draft at all, but I just know that somebody named Kedstat, I think, went second and nobody had them going second. So
yeah. I believe I again, just like you, I barely caught it. I think it was a pitcher that blew everybody away. some surprises early in the draft, so that's pretty exciting. Ben, have you caught any of this yet?
I right before we came on, yeah, I got home and got hit with the whirlwind of dinner time and all that stuff. But,
Well, thanks for making it, Ben. Thanks for making it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but yeah, the Orioles, it's like, man, so this guy wasn't on anybody's radar in the top 10.
That's what it sounds like.
Wow. Well, leave it to the Orioles, man.
Yeah. So here's where we're going to want to get started. I mentioned this to Toby before we got started. Trevor Plouffe predicted over a month ago that today was the day. Today was going to be the big announcement. We actually did receive a big announcement. He said on May 4th, I'm just going to read the quote, June 10th, spring training part 2 will start. July 1st will be opening day. It appears that he's got half of that right, with Manfred coming down today and saying 100% we're going to have baseball. Toby, what's your take there?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking a little bit before. I just think that there's such a difference for me in a season that's like half a season versus the 50 games or 48 games, whatever it is that they're kind of required to play. And so I'm really interested. I really want them to have as many games as possible. I think if it's a shortened season, you're going to see a lot of guys who either decide not to play because of the safety issues or who just take the season a little differently. I mean, you look at, I think it was the Nationals where I think, 19-31, 50 games through last season, and they ended up having, arguably the best team and winning the World Series. They wouldn't have even been close to the playoff spot. Similarly, you could have some real duds who get in there, and certainly it'll be interesting. It'll be really exciting, but I'd much rather have them come to an agreement, set the stage for an agreement, after 2021 season, because that's what we're really looking at is, big question mark over 2022, especially if they can't come to an agreement now.
Ben, what do you got on that? It does appear like this is going to take an ugly turn. We'll get fantasy baseball relevant here in a minute, but it does appear ugly. Players have already threatened to sit out this 50-game deal.
Yeah, and I think overall, just from the big picture standpoint, this has been teetering towards ugliness before this ever happened. Really, I think this next the CBA was going to be pretty contentious regardless. I mean, they were already having issues with minor league systems, owners. And you can go all down all kinds of rabbit holes with this. With ownership being greedy.
It's okay to blame the owners. I'm totally cool with that.
Well, I mean, look, it takes, just like I got to tell my kids, it takes two to tangle, and neither side is 100% right. And yeah, you look at the ownership and they certainly are perceived as greedy, but they're also taking on a ton of risk and in running an entire baseball, which, that encompasses a lot of other businesses, even, with that. And so these guys are they're businessmen. Other than a Jeter, who I believe he has part ownership. You don't get a lot of players through. They play the game, and that's their thing. The owners, you don't get into a business without wanting to make a profit. I'm a Cardinals fan, so I read a little bit of DeWitt's take on the
week. He's had a tough week. He's had a tough week.
He's had a tough decade and a half, basically, from the Cardinal fan base, given him, calling him DeWallet, not unwilling to spend. I mean, allegedly, here's what I would say: the teams. It would behoove them, in my opinion, especially at this point, to probably have a little more transparency, even though they're not required to. Totally. I think that would help fans, players, and everybody else understand. Everybody knows they make money. But if I had to guess, if you can back into the math on a back of the envelope type stuff and say, look, yeah, they do need people in the stands to generate revenue to pay the salaries, even with the big TV contracts, especially the smaller market teams. On the other hand, I get players, you want to get paid to work, and you want to get paid what you believe you're worth. And that's why, if a Blake Snell or somebody says, I don't want to play the season, I'm okay with that. That's totally up to the individual. And I'm not going to look at Blake Snell and go, what a turd or something like that, But yeah, DeWitt's comments didn't bridge any gaps. Let's put it that way. But he's not the only one saying that. It's an ownership thing.
The comments or the fact that Herzog just pointed out here in the comment section that he just bought a $7 million house in LA, and then talks about not having
right. But you also got to look at Bill DeWitt. Also was a successful lawyer prior to being a base, MLB owner. So probably could have bought the house regardless. There's all kinds of nuances. The bottom line is, I wanted to play as a fan, and I think fans are passionate about the game. I know I am. I want him to play 162. I want him to play till Christmas. I mean, it's.
He's fired up today.
Huh?
I appreciate the enthusiasm tonight. You're fired up.
We all want our baseball,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, let's talk about it.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Toby made the most relevant actual baseball point with the champion Washington Nationals struggling out of the gate, 19 and 30 something. Okay, let's get a little fantasy baseball relevant. We talked about it off air. So the Seattle Mariners were on fire in April. So we're talking about Domingo Santana, who was absolutely crushing. Now he ended up having a little bit of an injury, fell off in the second half. But Vogelbach, all of these guys were, some of them went undrafted, right? But this is the difficulty we're going to play with. I think we all decided we're all going to play this out no matter how it falls. I don't know that you can make drafting changes from here on out. It's going to be a crapshoot. It's still going to be fun. It's just going to be a different kind of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things is, there's going to be a ton of variance. The shorter the season, the more variance there is, and you can't necessarily predict that, right? Because it's not the true skill level of a given player. So luck is going to be involved. It'll be more of a factor. You can certainly, I think, do things to limit the amount of luck that you take on when you're constructing your roster. But it's definitely just a very different season, just from baseball and fantasy baseball perspective. And yeah, a lot of people point out could be exciting. It definitely could. But like I was saying before, like one of the reasons I love about fantasy baseball is it's a grind, and you're in there, you got 26 fab periods. If you're doing weekly fab, trying to grind out every ounce of value from your team. And that's one of the things that I think is wonderful about the game is it limits the amount of luck that can kind of happen and lead you to victory or lead you to be pretty bad. And so I'll definitely miss it, but just checking the box scores, that's what I miss. I just miss being on my phone for 12 hours straight, just going like, let's see, my guy's up now, That's what we all live for, right?
Yeah, man. There's nothing to, even in the beginning after we drafted, for like the first month, I kept like, get on the fantasy baseball apps and we'll see the transaction trends and everything. And it's like, oh yeah, crap. But, yeah, like you luck. That's why going over the trying to dig into some of these numbers isn't probably going to be as relevant as obviously as years in the past. And that kind of because you do, guys that and gals that like to dig into those numbers, they're doing that to try and limit the risk and take as much luck out of the equation as possible. Well, that's going to be. I mean, it's going to be. I think Bloomfield or one of them said on it's going to be total chaos. So we're
going to be trying more than ever to catch lightning in a bottle. That's the best we can do. That's all it boils down to, right? Okay.
Yeah. And the challenge is it's like, can you really catch lightning in a bottle though? Yeah. You can't, right? So we're just like,
yes, you can. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. I don't suggest anybody go and try to do that right now. But no, I mean, I definitely think there's things you can do to try to improve your chances of catching lightning in a bottle. But it is going to be those guys. It's going to be those Vogelbachs who win leagues, right? Where they come out of relative obscurity or nowhere to put up a tremendous month of the season. And if you have a tremendous 30 games, you just don't have that negative regression coming on the other end to bring it down.
Right. So that could win you the league this year. I mean, literally win you the league this year. And a guy like me, and probably all of us are a little bit more, we talked about this in another segment, I think, but people that are risk averse, you're going to have to really change your mindset and jump on I sat there and go, oh, Matt Boyd's got swinging strike percentage of X in the first 2 weeks. Let's see if this continues from there a week, then I'll, maybe put him on the watch list. And next thing you know, the next day he's gone. So you can't even really afford to wait for any kind of confirmation on your, so it's going to be, it's going to be like the Wild West. Just pull out your guns and just start shooting. That's kind of how I envision this is going to be, which is going to be chaotic, but it'll be fun. And back to the players, I think it'll be really interesting if you have a Blake Snell doesn't, who replaces Blake Snell? Well, is there somebody in the minors that, this is going to be really fascinating if that's the case. I think the minor league system doesn't have the season, but there's more opportunity, in my opinion, if some, because from what I understand, there's going to have to be a waiver signed to accept the risk of of COVID issues. And if somebody doesn't sign that, they're not going to play. So then, there could be plenty of opportunity like we've never seen in our lifetime, other than maybe some of the strike years.
Mm. Yeah, we got a really good question on the podcast this week where a listener asked, if I already drafted Mike Trout in a redraft and I know that he's having his first kid in August, do I try to trade him?
Wow.
Because he's going to miss at least 3 games, and if in doing that he breaks some sort of quarantine or whatever the safety protocols are, and he needs to then sit out for 14 games, he's missing a third of the season already, and so that really can change the value proposition. So that is the thing, I think, that more so than trying to kind of catch that lightning in a bottle, is there's just going to be so many things that we don't know about the way that that players are going to play and how the IL is going to be used, that I think are going to have a tremendous impact on who wins and who doesn't. And you just hate to see things like that. Luck is always a part of it with injuries, but when it's just a totally different landscape that you don't really understand, especially if we don't understand it while drafts are happening, I think that's kind of, that takes away a little bit from the fun. But if I win my leagues, I'm still going to
hoist it
over everybody else.
You got to hoist it.
Fly forever, right?
That's what really sucks. I'm horribly unlucky. And so I'm already up against it. It's like, this is not good for me.
There's so much uncertainty in fantasy baseball. There's so much uncertainty in real life baseball in 2020. There's so much uncertainty in life right now. We're all dealing with it. This is no different in fantasy baseball. Thanks for those takes. We went a little long there. I'm surprised, but I appreciate everyone's excitement on this.
Well, welcome to the life with me on your show. Every segment will go long. I promise you that.
Let's do it.
That's all right. I'm good with that.
Well, we're already having a good time. I specifically inserted this segment to boost everyone's mood, but we're already there. Today, let's talk about our best fantasy baseball day ever, whether it's just an incredible singular performance from a player, or we've all had one of those days where our roster just goes off with 5 bombs, 15 RBIs, maybe a steal, couple wins, couple saves. Toby, I think I heard you say you won on the last day. Is this right?
Yeah, a few years back, it was the last day of the season, and I think I had Travis Shaw as one of the guys on my team, and it was a roto league. It was neck and neck. We were just, it was just a 1 stolen base. I needed he could obviously get 2 stolen bases, but I needed a stolen base because we were tied, I think, at that time. And so anybody on my team could get a stolen base. And the last day of the season is just nuts because it's like you have guys getting pulled left and right in the middle of the game. So you just don't know how many plate appearances you're going to get, everything like that. And I remember, I can't even remember what inning it was. I think it was kind of middle of the game, 4th or 5th inning. Travis Shaw gets on base, and I'm not watching any of this on the TV because there's just too many games going on at once. Like I'm watching a different game or something like that. I'm not expecting Travis Shaw to steal a base. And I remember, I think I was trying to do like a live podcast or something like that where I was recording myself during the day just because I knew it was going to be up and down, up and down. And I remember Travis Shaw steals a base. And that was like it, I was like, this is going to happen. And I just remember like, Travis Shaw stole a base. He probably had 5 the whole season, and just like, I love you, Travis Shaw. I will never forget this. So, and then I ended up winning. I also had some good things going for me. Like, I think I had a couple pitchers who pitched well, and that's just the thing, right? Is you invest 162 games and whatever it is, 180 days or however long the baseball season lasts. And you're trying to grind out every little stat. And it comes down to it. And it's something like that. In the same league, I think it was K's. And it was just like throughout the day we were going, and it ended up being like 2 strikeouts. It was like 1 stolen base and 2 strikeouts were the reason why I won a roto full season league after all of those moves that happened. So that for me was just it was really nice. It was a big league for me. It was a decent buy-in, I think, and some buddies in the league. So it was great. So that was my best day. Yeah.
That's one of those things where you're just hooked at fantasy baseball for the rest of your life at that point. Ben actually has a similar championship story. Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think this was 2013, and the backstory to all this was I can come off as pretty arrogant at times. And
I'm picking up that vibe big time.
But Tony, I played back when fantasy baseball, like in early 2000s. Just nobody, it was just you're rolling the dice on everything. There was no numbers to really parse. You're looking at counting stats and stuff like that. Anyway, I quit playing because the friends league we were in, it was disastrous trades and
trade leagues are tough.
Yeah. And so 10 years later, Tony's like, "Oh, dude, you got to come on." I'm like, you know what? He kept bugging. I think it took him like 2 years. He's working on me on, and I'm like, "I'll come back." So 2013, I come back, and I go, "I'm going to win your league. I'm going to win your silly league, and then I'm going to go back into retirement."
True story.
And I ended up getting the first pick. To be fair, and I drafted Miggy I think it was Miggy that year, and I almost wire to wire, not quite. It came down, like you said, I had a pretty good team. I'm number one pick, and these guys I hadn't played in years. No, you're fine. Don't worry about it. I'm like, okay, whatever. So the last night, I think I had just recently watched Moneyball. I had the soundtrack on my headphones.
Get out of here.
I'm not kidding you. There was several categories that could have been like pretty, one or at least a 1 point swing. And so I was like, I stayed up till 3 a.m. with Moneyball soundtrack and with my inspiration. And I streamed, I actually picked up Jeff Smarja now as well. And I had like a choice between Smarja and Henderson Alvarez and the Miami Marlins, who were, they were middling, not as bad as they are this year or in the recent past. And he throws a no-hitter and just seals the deal. And I was like, Henderson, I'm like, I streamed a no-hitter, and then I went back into retirement for like a year, and he kept saying, quitter. And I came back, and now here we are doing this stuff.
Now we got a podcast.
Question is, how many times have you won the league since you won it that time?
None.
Oh, you should have kept staying in retirement then.
I've never, oh no, okay, I finished fourth one year, but I've been in top 3. So that's all but last year, really it's usually down to the wire. Like you were saying, that's what makes it fun. Is like, you got to really be kind of on top of things it's a grind. And now we had a guy last year that ran away with it pretty much the entire time. That sucked. But
that's the worst unless it's you. And then you're just like, what's up?
Yeah. And then you're like, then you're cruising across the finish line like, see ya, suckers,
boring last week of the season, boys. Come on.
We definitely heard about it, let me tell you.
Yeah. That's awesome, though. That's great. It's a great story.
Is there any better feeling, Toby and Ben, in those moments? You're like, I'm the smartest man alive, right?
And especially since I had called it, I'm like, I'm gonna win your silly league, and then I'm done again. And I was like, that's what I did. He was so mad, he wrote the check out to my wife, and he wrote out her name.
That's a true story.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was glorious.
Yeah. There's the only better feeling is holding it over everybody else's head for the whole offseason. That's the only better feeling.
Yes.
So my story is significantly less exciting, but it's just one that absolutely sticks out in my head. It's way back in 2011. Now, since then, this guy has won 2 World Series MVPs for 2 separate teams. But on April 28th, 2011, Ben Zobrist was my hero.
Yeah.
Okay? I'm sure you don't remember. I'm going to give you the stats, and then I'll frame it up a little differently. But it was Rays at Twins. Ben Zobrist was a solid player back, multi-eligible, could play him anywhere back in 2011 with Joe Madden and his Rays. He went 7 for 10, 5 runs, 2 bombs, 10 RBIs with a steal. Okay?
Doubleheader?
It was a doubleheader.
Okay.
It was a doubleheader. Now, I think, in all honesty, I had a better shortstop at the time. I had a better option. You get the doubleheader, though, you obviously throw him in. It's a no-brainer, right? You take that chance, and he absolutely went nuts. 2 bombs, like I said, 10 RBIs, and the steal. He scooped him in every once in a while back in the day, right? And I've been in love with Ben Zobrist ever since. Eureka, Illinois, right down the street from me and Ben. We love him.
Yeah, you're a Cubs fan. It works out great for you. Yeah. It was kind of like it was meant to be a little bit.
That's probably what it was. Absolutely, it was fate. It was definitely fate. Well, I'm glad we had that fun. Fantasy baseball has just been so downer as we drag through this. Toby, you are famously known for your pocket aces strategy. Okay. It's not something that me and Ben necessarily go with. We're terrified of the risk factor involved with drafting starting pitching that early. I know Ben will probably comment on that. Our last guest on the show, Dave Swan, had mentioned that he went triple aces out of the gate last week. I'd really like you to go deep on this topic of pocket aces on your roster construction and why it's the goal for you.
Yeah, well, and shout out for the triple aces. I mean, that's it's brave, and I think, but there's been some research done recently about how in a shortened season, while we think that there's going to be more variance among pitchers, it's actually hitters that are likely to experience the most variance in their performance. And I think, I think there's definitely, I give David credit for that, because I think that's something that I've thought a little bit about since I read that, and just thinking about how easy it'll be for 1 or 2 bad starts from a streamer to just destroy your ratios for the entire year. So shout out for that, first of all. So for the pocket aces strategy, and it feels like years since I've talked about this, it's like all preseason, it was pocket aces, but it's been a little while for me. But essentially the idea with pocket aces, and depending on how you want to interpret the strategy, essentially it's taking like your first 2 picks are starting pitchers. It could also be like, just making sure you have 2 of the first like top 15 or top 12 if you're, in a 12-team league, or 10 if you're in a top 10 league. But essentially drafting 2 starting pitchers with your first 2 picks. And the reason why is a couple things. Number one, we know from previous research that aces are the most likely to return their value. It's not necessarily something surprising, but they are the least risky starting pitchers to take. They tend to return a lot of value, not necessarily the same value that you buy, but early on in drafts, like the goal isn't necessarily to, like, you want to get the most value whenever you can, but drafting players high in the draft picks, right? You draft 1-1. Your goal is not to get the guy who's necessarily the best that year. You just want a guy who's in the first round pick who returns a lot of the value that you're getting. So when you draft them, they tend to return the most value of what you're paying for them. And then there's after like the aces, there's this pocket of pitchers where there's just very little difference in their value. There may be a difference in their perceived value, but research has shown that we're not that good at identifying who those pitchers are at the beginning of the season who are going to excel at the end of the season. Now, some people may be better or worse at that for a variety of different reasons. So you need to draft your strengths. But essentially what it allows me to do, I draft those 2 starting pitchers. You only have 9 pitchers, generally speaking, in a league, and you have 14 hitters in the leagues that I play in, at least. And so the pitchers can have a much bigger impact on your ratios. And in pitching, you have 2 ratios versus just the 1 ratio that you have in hitting. You have ERA, you have WHIP, and you want to have a really strong foundation in those, because as you stream guys, as you're hoping one of those like SP6s, SP7s, SP8s hits, you're going to get a lot of duds just by nature of like the fact that they're not very good pitchers, right? And while we think that we know who's going to be a good pitcher, look back at last season's draft and you'll be like, oh man, what was I thinking, right? And so you're getting that really strong foundation, and then you attack hitting with depth. And so the next 7 or 8 picks that you take are all going to be hitters, right? And so while everybody else is taking, 2 pitchers later on who aren't as good, you're really attacking with depth. And one of the things that you're deciding to do is not to address your closer until later on. I'm a big fan of waiting, going after closers who have a job for sure. But again, with relief pitchers, it's a similar thing where there's a ton of variance, right? Year to year, you'll have Edwin Diaz, who's the best starting pitcher in any given year, one year, and then he's god awful the next year. Not necessarily because his talent has changed dramatically, but because over a short sample size, like the 50 to 65 innings that they pitch, like there's just more variance. And so I'm going after guys that have high skills, that have a role, but where I don't necessarily have to pay the same premium. And during those picks, I'm going to be taking hitters. And so really what I'm just trying to do is take the research that I've seen that's out there and apply it. And also, I do think that there's something to going against the grain a little bit where everybody's attacking in a similar way. I think having 2 starting pitchers also builds in some insurance because, you're worried that one might get hurt. An example I always use, and it's confirmation bias, so take it for what you will. But last year, I drafted in my league where I did the best, I had Garrett Cole and I had Blake Snell. I went 1-2 with them. Blake Cole was out of this world. He was unbelievable. Blake Snell was a huge disappointment. But just having Garrett Cole on my team was such a boost to my pitching that I was able to, get like out of, I think, a potential of, 75 points in, pitching. I had something like 70 or 68 or something like that in a very competitive 15-team league. And so that's the thing. It's a little bit of insurance because even if they do struggle, when you draft them that high, their struggles are not the struggles of other guys, right? Like their floor is a lot lower than a lot of other guys. So a good example would be Aaron Nola. Yeah, if you drafted Aaron Nola, he sucked, but he's not the reason why you lost, Like he still had a 3.8 ERA. He still had a 1.25 whip, He still had 200 strikeouts. He still had 200 innings pitched. He still had a decent amount of wins, that it's okay to have a guy who does that, especially when you have another ace to reinforce that. So again, it's not for everybody. And I play a lot of leagues in the NFBC that have an overall competition. And so it's really, really important to have balance across the board. And I feel much more comfortable spending draft capital on starting pitchers early on and being able to grind out some of those hitting positions. And I think that's going to be even more so the case in this shortened season, because there are going to be guys who just catch fire, or like with the divisions. If we have a 48-game season, it's likely that they're just going to play within the division. And then you have guys like on the Indians and on the Twins who just get this massive increase in value because they play the Royals, the Tigers, the White Sox, who are essentially, to me, like Lucas Giolito and everybody else, and who also have awful bullpens. Or similarly, like with the Dodgers don't really face any excellent hitting teams, right? They get the Giants, they get, the Rockies, which sucks when you're in Coors, but then they get the Padres, they get the D-backs. Like there's not really any teams that really frighten you in that division. And so, again, like I think it's not for everybody necessarily, but for me, from a roster construction standpoint, I want to have that really solid foundation in those 2 ratios with the volume of innings, with those Ks, with those pitchers. And I feel much more comfortable getting those hitters later on and really attacking with depth instead of going like 2 or 3 hitters to start off with. And then I need to get my, 2 or 3 starting pitchers because I'm not as confident in the 2 that I get initially. And then I got to get my closer as well. While you're doing that, I'm going to try to kind of reinforce the hitting end of that. And I've been successful with it. I think most importantly, like I'm pretty much competitive in all of the leagues that I participate in. And so that to me is also really encouraging because it means like I've got a lower floor for my team. And as long as I'm competitive, I feel good about my ability to grind out a little bit of value throughout the season. Anyway, that was me talking for a really long time about that strategy, but that's kind of what it is.
That makes perfect sense, actually. When you draft those studs, just a reliable studs you count on, and you framed it perfectly. Because when you don't take those guys in the first and second round, you end up taking these guys in the third, fourth, and fifth round. They all have at least one question mark, right? Who knows how that's going to play out? And then you might end up with a Brandon Woodruff, who a lot of people are in, a lot of people are way out on, right? There's a lot of speculation with that. We're talking about pitch sequencing at some point, like if this guy throws this slider a little bit more, it's a total guess. So I do like that explanation a lot. That's really interesting. You want to go over like your TGFBI team? I found this really interesting, okay? I want to know, when you walked out of your TGFBI squad, do you feel like you were drafted defensively, like you were drafted against? It's like, Toby's here, I need to get my starting pitchers.
No, I mean, I think people, in that league, like people are drafting. I'm just trying to get this up. I had like 17 NFBC teams or something like that. So with the TGFBI team, I do remember pitching going really early, but I was kind of, in some respects, like I was anticipating that, I think, in a lot of ways. So I remember, so I was hoping to get.
Were you two in the same league?
No, sir.
We weren't.
Okay. All right.
We weren't. But there was 4 pitchers who went in the first 12 picks. So essentially Max Scherzer, who I think at the time had an ADP of like 15 or 16, he went 12 right before me, and I got Walker Buehler, which, to be honest with you, if we play with these leagues, I think is absolutely fantastic. I might be, if the leagues are played, I may be wanting to get Buehler. Maybe I'll probably get him in the middle of the round. And also, I want to apologize. I think my 6-year-old is having, or 3-year-old is having, a concert in the background. So you may or may not hear that. You probably hear that on every single one of my podcasts, but my kids are loud. So I really like Buehler. But I mean, it was interesting to see kind of how the draft developed in a lot of ways. And, in an ideal scenario, I would have gone Buehler and Jose Ramirez, but he went right before me. And I've always been big on Starling Marte. I'm a roster construction guy, like, where for me, what I try to do is target scarcity. And so, and not scarcity in like position, but scarcity in categories. And so, like, early on in drafts, like, starting pitchers for me are the scarcest thing. Every year, the best starting pitcher is the most valuable. It doesn't mean that he's necessarily going to come from there, but I think they're going to return the most value. And then after that, what I really want to be doing is looking at stolen bases and batting average, because, you can get some guys that contribute in that later in drafts, but they're going to hurt you in other areas. And so as long as I've got that, I can attack power late, which I know might be a difference that we have, in the way that we like to construct our rosters. But that's kind of like what I generally focus on. And so that's where, Starling Marte comes into the equation right there. So I don't know if you want me to go through it and tell you what I was thinking, but it definitely pitching definitely went a little bit faster than I was anticipating.
That was really interesting, the Starling Marte comment there, because we know the great Todd Zola, as far as TGFBI goes, didn't he go round 1, 13th overall?
Yeah, it was super interesting, actually, because I think he drafted after I did. And so I went 19. And actually, before Todd had made that draft pick, I had the earliest selection of Starling Marte at any point in any draft. I drafted him at 17 or 16 in a draft earlier on in the season because speed goes early. A lot of the second round guys don't have speed, so I'm not like super interested in them. So it was interesting to see that. It made me feel a little bit better about getting him in a league that I really care about a lot. Like, this is definitely, while there's no money involved, I take a ton of pride in all of my leagues, but like, especially when I'm going up against competition, like, I know a lot of the people who are in this league, I have a lot of respect for the work that they do. And so winning the league and finishing high in the overall and TGFBI is really important to me. And so this is how I draft, and that's kind of the way that I went. And it was nice to see that, Todd was similarly high on them. It's always nice when you have somebody who's really well respected in the industry, who's won, an overall like TGFBI before, who, kind of agrees with maybe a decision that you've done.
Absolutely. Let me just interject a short story here, because I went hard on Starling Marte. My pre-draft strategy, I'm going Jose Ramirez. I do believe he's a unicorn at that position. In the first round, I did take him 9th overall, so I set the min pin on TGFBI for him. And then I'm coming back Starling Marte. I'll address my starting pitching later. In the moment, this is my first year being TGFBI. Yeah. I pivoted and drafted Bryce Harper instead, and then I raged on a solo podcast that night.
Yeah. I mean, it is tough though, because you feel like people are watching a little bit,
Sure.
like people are paying attention. And I think that's one of the things that's really challenging. And in some ways I've had come from confirmation bias to support me, but like, I feel like I've been successful. There's the 2 starting pitchers is definitely different than a lot of people do. It's not necessarily that unique in I think the main event at all, but like, it's nice to have some success using a strategy to make you feel a little bit more comfortable and confident in it. But I can see where I would have gone Starling Marte, but sorry to rub salt in the wound.
That's all right. 100%. Those are all great points. I think, Ben, I know we've talked about this a million times. We are terrified of pitchers being the most volatile players in the league. So we're terrified to lose those players in the first and second round. We stay away from it. Ben, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, well, just real quick, I don't like taking a pitcher in the first round because of the overall injury risk. It's hard to do. It's hard to predict. I mean, and this year is a perfect example for me personally. I was all in on, for the first time ever, I was all in on Syndergaard. I'm like, he's finally fallen to where I felt you're getting a value for him, and it came, no indication, nothing like that. And then you always had the Sales and the Kershaws. They get that always had the injury risk. And like I think because the pitchers do hold up their value a little bit better if they're not hurt, then yeah, there's a lot. The reason I asked you two if you're in the same league was because I remember Tony saying, "Dude, pitching is flying off the shelf here. Like I have no options." And I'm like, I got this guy, I got this, I got he's cool in this one. Now at the end, I did lose out on some of my sleepers that I was really wanting to get. But I was pretty happy with that. But like you were saying, I have been whammied by these freaking relievers in recent years. Mm-hmm. It's one every year, and it pisses me off. And I fell for it again this year. I panicked in a couple of leagues that I was like, I gotta get so and so, and really almost it comes down to job security thing for me. I almost, Kenley Jansen, I thought was a great value at that position this year because, he had a crappy year, but look, the guy's going to pitch.
I like him too.
Yeah. He's getting paid to pitch. I got made fun of last year for taking Chapman. And I was like, I got to get one, awesome. Last year I was like, Diaz, I mean, this kid's good. It's almost better to have, a few years of track record that's maybe not elite, but just really consistently good, rather than, because like you said, the variance is so ridiculous with some, even, Diaz or something like that. And stupid me for thinking, his best year ever is gonna, but I was realistic about it. I'm like, even if he does this in half, still, a solid year for a closer, but it was worse, way worse than that. It's always worse than what you can really fathom. But yeah. So the two, I always try and get an ace in the second round. I got Cole last year. This year, Tony talked me into
Clevenger.
If Bueller hadn't gone so high, I was really looking at him. Tony talked me into Clevenger. And I was happy with that after, well, especially now with the season being delayed. But I always try and get. You mentioned draft what your strengths are. I always feel like I can pick up that there's going to be a forgotten Lance Lynn somewhere down a quarter way through the season, or somebody that snaps back that you can pick up on. A Matt Boyd, who I waited on too late last year. And
Lucas Giolito.
Huh?
Lucas Giolito.
Lucas Giolito. And it's like, but that's a guy I wasn't really comfortable drafting this year as high as he was going, because it's like there's no track record. And that's why pitching is so difficult. You have those guys, and then you have the Chris Sales and the Kershaws of the world are like, yeah, they're really elite when they're on the field, when they don't have back issues or elbow issues. And then you have a Syndergaard blow up, and it's like, oh crap. I try and just if that's gonna happen to me, I try and get it. I try and soak it up down. And later on in the draft.
It's really just unpredictable, 100% all around. I mean, you took your shot with Syndergaard, like you said, this year, and it still blew up in your face. It is what it is. Like, you know what I mean?
And back to drafting your strengths. Like I the waiver wire is my favorite place to play. And it's like, but you go through some of these stats, and it's really hard. Like for hitters, like, well, this guy's definitely due for some regression. Well, yeah, he probably is, but when? And that's the real trick. It's like, yeah, you're going to be probably right on some of this, but I have a hard time. It's like I know he's due for to pop him back, and it doesn't happen for 2 weeks, maybe even 3 if I'm really patient with it sometimes, and then I throw him away exactly the wrong time. It seems like a lot of times. So I'm more comfortable just trying to grab pitching later. And take a flyer on some of them and get the next. Robbie Ray was another one for whatever year. I was at that
his one year.
His 1 year. Yeah. I mean, he was dope that year.
Yeah,
until he got beamed in the head with a comebacker. But
so we do have one question from our commenters. I did want to try to get to these as best as we could. This was from our last guest, Dave Swan. Toby, Dave asked, any TGFBI regret picks? I do wonder. I'm gonna frame this up a little differently because you did draft 2 of the best catchers in the league in your TGFBI team, JT Realmuto and Gary Sanchez. Is that regretful at all for you?
I did do that. You're right. This is what's great about going back at the teams you drafted like 4 months ago. You're like, oh no, I did do that. So. I don't know if it's a regret, to be honest with you. I really like the way that my team actually came together. There's a lot of guys that I really like on the TGFBI team. So the Sanchez one, maybe, but I actually think that in this particular instance, the dilemma that I had at the time is it was a very sharp room. And so a lot of the picks, like I was hoping that Tim Anderson would get to me at picks, I think that's 79 right there. I was expecting him to get to me at pick 79 or 78. I don't even know, 76, 77, 78. And because it was kind of like I think it was like a 65-35 proposition that he would get back to me, and he didn't. And so I was left kind of deciding between Gary Sanchez and Josh Donaldson. Actually, those were the 2 that I was most interested in. To be honest with you, I feel like, this was pretty early on. I really ended up liking Jeff McNeil later on, but I think there was some possibility he would come back to me the next round, and so I waited. But I don't really regret it because the decision was Gary Sanchez or Josh Donaldson. And when I think about what they're going to be providing me, and I think about I had Sanchez actually as a higher ranked player in my valuations that I do. And I just think that the combination of him and Realmuto really gives me a big advantage at the catcher position. And so I felt pretty good about doing that later. So I wouldn't necessarily regret that. I think if I were to regret a pick, I actually, to be honest with you, I'm looking at my team. I really like my team and the way that it's come together. I'm not saying that as man, I love my team. I'm badass, but just looking at it, there's a lot of the guys that I ended up really liking towards the end of drafts that I was able to get. If I were to look at it and I were to make one pick at who I was disappointed about, I would say it sounds a little weird, but maybe Joe Musgrove.
Okay.
In that particular instance, I have him as my 3rd starting pitcher. I like Joe Musgrove a lot. Let me see what happened here.
I really like that catcher combination. That's amazing. I mean, that's as long as Sanchez holds up, holy smokes. I mean, that's a huge advantage in out of that spot.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people tend to look at like those weak spots. I know I used to really focus on that, like what position is the thinnest, and that's where I kind of develop a strategy there at times too. And I used to have a specific catcher. We've talked about this in prior episodes but that has also blown up on me in recent years.
Yeah, it's tough. And I think that's one thing that we don't talk about enough in fantasy baseball is like, I don't think we're as good as we think we are, right? Like every year,
Spot on.
honestly, right? Like, it's like, look at your draft board every year, the beginning of the year and the end of the year. And it's like, you're like, what the hell was I thinking? Like, why did I think that guy was going to be good? Oh, because he was good the earlier year and like whatever. Yeah. But I think it's really instructive because I think a lot of times what I try to fight against, I need to get better at this, is I normally go into the draft with a plan and I have an idea of who I'm going to pick at every single point in a draft. But I think a lot of times you feel pressure to take a guy. You're like, with Musgrove, it's like, oh man, I need a third starting pitcher. I got to get this guy right here. You don't. You don't necessarily need to. The difference between Joe Musgrove and Dylan Bundy, who went 3 rounds later, I think, is not huge. And he's not on a good team, so the wins are unlikely to be there. So there's a little bit of a cap on the ceiling. So that's just a reason. I really like Joe Musgrove. I think he could be really, really good. But I just wish in that instance, for example, that I would have waited and gotten Dylan Bundy and maybe gotten another hitter in that position. But yeah, I just don't think we're as good as we think we are. And so that's why roster construction is so important. Is because if you build a roster, if you construct it in a way to limit risk and to give yourself the best opportunity to compete, I think in a lot of ways, it takes a little bit of the onus on the exact player that you're getting. You're more drafting a type of player or a profile of a player than the actual player. And so it allows us to be wrong and still be successful and not necessarily miss out. So I think that's one of the things that I like about it. Anyways.
I'm going to put you on the spot real fast before we move on. Okay. Now, obviously, we drafted TGFBI in March way long ago. Okay. But now we're talking about maybe a 50-game sprint. It's hard to determine that scenario, who's better, who's not, or whatever. But I'm going to go head to head, Real Muto versus Sanchez. Do you like one of those two better in a sprint format like we're going to be facing here soon?
Oh, yeah. Easy, Real Muto. I think Real Muto is incredibly undervalued. We got a question about how early I'd draft him in drafts now. For the shortened season. And I said, I think like 2-3 turn in a 15-team league, 29-30, something like that. Because with Real Muto, number one, he's probably going to be the DH. I mean, he is a better hitter than every other DH option that they have, unless they sign somebody. So I think he gets a huge plate appearance advantage over a lot of the catchers, especially if they go to double headers, where he could catch a game and you could DH the second game. And there's no way that the catcher is going to play both of those games. So I actually think he's going to have a huge advantage. And I think Sanchez, the Yankees have enough weapons as it is that they don't necessarily need him to be in the lineup. They're not going to put him at first base. They're not going to put him at DH probably because they're already going to have guys there. So I would say Real Muto. And Real Muto is also very good at batting average for a catcher especially, and stolen bases as a catcher. And those are the two most scarce categories in roto leagues, generally speaking. And then within catchers, it's even exacerbated, right? Like you have a position that is traditionally very low average, decent power, no stolen bases. And so you're getting a guy who has both of those qualities in addition to the plate appearance advantage. I think that's absolutely massive.
That's a great point on the DH. I don't think very many people have thought that far ahead. So excellent point on that, Toby. Let's go ahead and move forward. And I just want to be upfront. This is something I believe I struggle with as an analyst. I'm not even, I'm reluctant to call myself an analyst. I'm just a guy who does a podcast at this point. Okay. But this is something I have reached out to a few guys, few of the heavy hitters within the community to have this conversation, because it is something I struggle with. It's these super sophomores and their perceived progression in ADP. Okay. Mm-hmm. If me and Ben are kind of simpletons, we look at these naked numbers on StatCast and we're like, he doesn't hit the ball very hard. We don't want him. Right?
Oh, you're talking about Victor Robles.
Here we go.
You got the right guy on the show because I love Victor Robles. So.
Well, that's the point. I talked to Ben off air about this before, and I actually did go back. It was a couple of months ago when you posted about Victor Robles, and you and I did go back and forth, and it kind of did open my eyes to something. I'm not sold necessarily when it comes to ADP, but I do understand when it comes to roster construction, the value he has. Let's go ahead and talk about Victor Robles, ADP of 70 overall. Why do you like him so much, Toby?
Well, I mean, the thing that I love about Victor Robles is the profile. I mean, yes, the StatCast data and the hard hit data is not very good, but I think one thing that differentiates him from a lot of the other guys that don't hit hard is his max exit velocity. So if you look at his max exit velocity, it's at 114, which is very, very good. So he has I think it's 114. It's been a while since I looked. So he has the ability to hit the ball very, very hard. It's kind of a barrel accuracy, like hit tool type problem for him. And so with him, when I draft him, I'm not expecting a high batting average, right? If he gets 250 to 260, that's totally fine with me. I'm not expecting through the roof power, but if he can give me like the equivalent of 15 to 20 home runs, during a full season, that's fine. And there's a couple things that I really love about him. The speed, obviously, right? Like last year, I think he stole 27 stolen bases. And the thing we forget is he spent a lot of the season batting 8th in front of the pitcher. And when you look at the difference between his stolen bases when he was in front of or behind the pitcher or in front of the pitcher and not, there's a massive difference. There's a massive difference between his number of stolen bases. And with the DH in the NL now, he is going to steal a lot of bases. And yes, he has some skill growth that he needs to happen. If it happens, great. If he's able to replicate last season, great. I feel totally comfortable with that at the position that he's going. But I actually see him as a guy who could take a step up if he improves his hit tool. If it stays the same again, it's fine. But the speed, I really think could go next level because he's not going to be in front of the pitcher. And if he's batting towards the end of that lineup, he's going to steal even more without the pitcher there because, if he's batting first or second, then he's got, Juan Soto behind him. He's got, whoever, Starlin Castro, whoever else is going to be in that lineup in that spot. But if he's towards the end of the lineup, there's a lot less potential there. And so they want him to get on base. They're going to want him to be active. And so I actually think for those reasons, it's not without concern. And I totally get you're not being sold on him. Like, it's scary to draft a guy right there that it's not clear he's good at hitting necessarily. But I think he does enough with power. He does way enough with speed that overall what you're going to get is a guy who has a pretty high floor and has a very high ceiling if he takes the next steps.
Ben, how do you feel about Victor Robles in the season going forward? I did mention, as Toby did as well, the hard hit nature that we like to see isn't quite there on him, but the floor is. I totally agree on that point.
Yeah, the hard hit, like that was covered. I just, and I get the max edge velocity. He just doesn't, like the barrel rate just isn't there to really make that as relevant for me. And the whole key here for me and Tony was the ADP. It's just, and I get this is what drives me a little bit nuts, but I've been so averse to adjusting to this. I'm always trying to. I don't want to pay up for stolen bases because it's just one category, but so many people do, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I will note that I'm usually in the bottom third of the leagues in that category, surprisingly. But I just don't like. And that was the other thing. I just don't think with the hit skills, I don't think that he'll remain in the top part of the lineup. So you're not going to get the counting stats and the runs and things like that. Now that would possibly benefit the stolen bases in that case. But I just have a hard time pulling that trigger, especially the comp for us, I believe, was Oscar Mercado at a much lower ADP. I was more comfortable going for something like that, who I think, even if his hit tool doesn't improve, which I don't think his will that much. I think he was over his skis too last year, and in the power department anyway, has the potential to run and get some stolen bases further down the line. So
I have Mercado on my TGFBI team, so I'm right there with you on him.
Yeah. And so that to me is a more reasonable get. Robles was way too rich for my blood.
The problem with that is if you pass on Robles at that ADP and then you miss on Mercado, you might be in trouble.
No, man. There's D. Gordon going undrafted, dude.
Yeah, but the thing that I like to think about with that, because I totally understand it, like he seems like a one category guy, but one of the ways that I think about it is that like a lot of the guys that you're getting later, let's say you draft D. Gordon, right? And you draft D. Gordon, you draft his three to 5 home runs to get your stolen bases. And you draft his 25 RBIs that he's going to get in a full season, or his 30 RBIs that he's going to get in a full season, right? You can't really rely on the batting average, but let's like throw that to the side. That is a crap ton, like especially if you're less so if you're in a single league, but if you're in an overall league where you can't really be weak in any of the categories to compete in the overall, then like you're really destroying yourself, because every pick from that point forward, you need to be constantly thinking about power. You need to be constantly thinking about RBIs, because you're literally need to make up like, so last year, the person who the 80th percentile in the NFBC main event overall, your team needed to average 23 home runs per player. So every guy that you draft that's under 23 home runs is stuff you need to make up. So with D. Gordon, you got to make up 20 home runs across, the rest of your team. And then you think about, getting 23 home runs from a catcher is hard. And then I play 2 catcher leagues, so that's 2 positions there. Oh man, that makes it really tough. And then you think about, well, if I need to get speed with my shortstop and my second baseman, because there's very little speed at first base and third base, then you start to be like, okay, how do I construct this roster in a balanced way where I'm able to get all those categories? So that would be like my one note of caution is part of it is drafting Victor Robles because of what he doesn't do to you in the other categories with the skills that he provides, where later in the draft, it's virtually impossible to get a guy who can contribute power and speed and batting average, or without hurting you dramatically in runs or RBIs or something like that. So that's kind of the way that I think about it.
Let me just give some naked numbers on Victor Robles. I agree on all points there. Hard hit percentage was bottom 4% of the league, 22.7 K percentage. That's not too bad for a kid that's 21 years old. Doesn't walk a ton. When he was batting out of the second slot, I did find this interesting. He had 123 PAs, 4 bombs, 9 steals, but didn't make a lot of contact. And it was only batting 223 there. I think when Eaton went down for a couple of weeks but I think you're right. He probably is going to bat 8th or 9th in this lineup going forward, barring injury. But I do see, and I want to thank you for this, but I do see some kind of upside, and I do believe in that solid floor. Even if there's no improvement, you will get some home runs from this guy and a ton of speed. So I think it's worthy going after Victor Robles at this point, especially if you go with the pocket ace strategy right there. That makes a ton of sense. Now let's move on to Vladimir Guerrero Jr. We got a couple sophomores after that. We all saw the videos of him hitting moonshots in AAA and AA. It hasn't quite happened in the MLB. We did see significant improvements in the second half. Toby, he's going higher than Victor Robles. People are all sold that this is going to happen. ADP 55.
Yeah, I'm totally out on Vlad Jr. I'll probably look very, very foolish when I say this, because I'm sure he'll probably break out this year. Although it's 50 games, so could he really break out? But so I just think there's too many things that Vlad doesn't have that we're expecting to change in order for him to get to his value. And so what I mean by that is his ground ball rate is very high. It's nearly 50%. And so if you think that he's going to take the step forward in his power, then you're anticipating that he drops that ground ball rate considerably. But what evidence do we have that he can actually do that? Because we don't. His ground ball rate surged towards the end of last year, right? Even during this spring training, one of the things that you can look at during spring training, which is somewhat predictive, Jeff Zimmerman has done research on this, is ground out to air out ratio. They don't have fly balls and line drives, so they have ground out and air outs. He had, I think, 1 air out and 10 ground outs this spring.
Wow.
So he wasn't fixing it this spring so far either. Again, very, very small sample size, but you're expecting that to change. You're also expecting him to be able to translate his exit velocity to the air, which is something he hasn't done consistently. His average exit velocity on line drives and fly balls, so dangerous balls, is pretty low. I think he's like, I should have looked this up, but I think he's 140th or something like that out of 398 batters on average exit velocity on line drives and fly balls. So because he hits the ball at these very low launch angles, which I think can maximize for his swing exit velocity, he can hit the ball really, 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 really hard, but he can't necessarily do that consistency at the launch angles that are going to result in home runs. And another thing for him is throughout his minor league career, and again, like there are people who know a lot more about his minor league career than I do, he always had pretty high BABIPs. He had really low strikeout rates, which he's been able to produce, but he wasn't going up against defenses in the majors. And ground balls are not going to be as successful in getting base hits in the majors as they are in the minors.
Right. I was shocked to see his BABIPs as high as they were in the minors, but that's consistent, and that's probably why. That's a great point. And he's not making. I'm totally out on Vlad, and for all the reasons you've talked about. Go ahead. I just want. I couldn't believe that. I'm like, oh, surely he's got some kind of weird variation here, but not really. They're just consistently high.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just don't think there's like a lot that I love in the profile. Like his contact rate isn't particularly good. Like, yeah, he had a very low, K rate, for the majors especially. But his contact rate is about 1% better than league average. He's not particularly disciplined at the plate. And so that for me is the real big thing. And so I can definitely see him taking a jump in batting average. I could definitely see him hitting 300, but I think for somebody who you're getting literally 0 stolen bases from and who put up 15 home runs in 512 plate appearances with the juiced ball, and has that ground ball rate, I think he needs to make too many changes and he needs to be too good, to validate that draft value. So I'm totally out on him. He's going to be one of my busts, and somebody I'll do a bold prediction about him not being very good on.
As ADP was rolling in early November and December, me and Ben are texting back and forth. We're like, Victor Robles, are you shitting me? Vlad Guerrero at 55? I ain't doing that. Okay. But this is the reason for everything that you've pointed out. I believe I just looked up his exit velocity on fly balls and line drive was 93.2. Okay. Not terrible, but not great either. Right. So spot on there. I think you're absolutely right. The conversation I've had, I thought I was missing. I literally wrote to people, what am I missing on some of these sophomores? Why are they going so high? And the general answer I got was, well, I see the numbers that you see. However, generally the industry or the community gets it right. That was the answer that I got. And I struggled with that. So I want to thank you again for being here and providing some kind of confirmation for us rookies, me and Ben.
Well, you're too kind. Definitely. It's a good, trust your analysis. Go with your gut, because I think there's, there's a lot to this, but there's also, go with what you see. Believe in yourself.
Ben, do you want to touch on Vlad anymore? I know this next guy has been on your board since the beginning.
Yeah, I'll lead into this, and now I'm really regretting not getting more shares of this next guy, because I never really put up Vlad's underlying numbers with Biggio's, but I'm assuming that's who you're going to talk about next here, right? And just the barrel rate. I mean, Biggio's at 9, Vlad's like I think 7.5 ish. And hard hit. I mean, Biggio's in the 40s, Vlad's in the 30s. There's all kinds of issues, and the whole sophomore slump thing was always kind of a old wives' tale type of thing. I know Fangraphs had a good article on rookies of the year a while back, and that compared, and I think it was 64% of the rookies of the year had a sophomore slump, and there's 4 that were the same, and then the rest did better. So I mean, really, and those are the rookies of the award winners, not the overall rookies. But I think there are some predictive values here, where like with launch angle and things like that. He's got a lot of adjustments to make, and it's harder for these young guys to make those adjustments to begin with because they haven't been in the league very long. That's I feel the same way about Robles overall, but Biggio, I think his ADP was around 128-ish, if I'm not mistaken.
That's real close. I have him at 125. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So somewhere around there. I am really and the final nail in the coffin for Vlad. In fact, I think the four you want to talk about, I had him rated. Vlad he was a third because he's got guaranteed playing time basically. So that's a plus. But there's no stolen bases. Biggio, I mean, look, we talked about him earlier. I think he's going to have a better year than Gleyber Torres, and Torres avoided the sophomore slump in a huge way. Amazingly, and I think Biggio has the potential to do that, and the numbers bear this out. And I think most of his numbers from the minors were kind of in line with that as far as ISO and BABIP and things like that, if I remember right. But this guy, I think, he's got the plate discipline, and yeah, he strikes out 20. I think it was 28% of the time, somewhere in there. But that's not out of the ordinary, and I think it was a little bit lower than that in the minors, but. The plate discipline, the pitch recognition. This guy, he's I think he's got, and he can run. They make a big deal about, well, he wasn't caught once. Well, that's great. You're gonna get caught. He's got the potential to be a 30-30 guy in my opinion, and I think some of these underlying numbers bear that out. With he's more of a launch. His exit velo isn't great. It's really pretty average. So that's kind of the knock, but his launch angle, it makes up for that.
He's a fly ball guy for sure. He definitely barely hits it on the ground ever.
Yeah, 0.45 I believe was the ground ball to fly ball ratio, and Mike. I mean, not that he's a Mike Trout. Let's make that perfectly clear. But Trout is I think 0.51 or something like that. So there's fewer things he's got. Basically, I think he's got to swing the bat more.
Yeah,
and be less patient. Almost kind of a Matt Carpenter dilemma. So I'd rather take a flyer on him at 128 or 125 or whatever it is than Robles or Vlad, especially. So
to your point, Ben, Kevin Biggio's Z swing. Zone swings is 56.5. He's seen a lot of pitches and letting them go by. You're saying he has a high baseball IQ and is waiting for his pitch. The league average is around 68.5. Is this what you point to as well, Toby, when you think big things for Kevin Biggio in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little ambivalent on Biggio. I definitely hear the I think Ben articulated a lot of the reasons why to like him. Like a lot of the things that he does are things that you want to see from a hitter, like the very low ground ball rate. You want to see guys hit the ball in the air. The stolen bases are really nice. Like he was 14 for 14, I think. And so that is really nice. But my concern with him is the batting average, because he is so passive. Like, the batting average, I think, was like 235 or something. And a lot of folks are expecting an improved batting average because of the BABIP. But he hits the ball in the air so much that he is going to have a bad BABIP, because fly balls tend to land for hits fewer times. And my big concern with him is the exit velocity. So his max exit velocity last year was 104.6, and he ranked 242nd out of 250 batters. And so that's his max exit velocity. So what that tells me is there's some bat speed issues there that are much harder to fix. And so, that's a little bit of my concern, is just, he does need to be a little less passive. I think if he can make that adjustment, especially like on first pitches and things like that, where he's getting fastballs, I think he could be a real boon. And I think where he's going is a fine value, but I'm not as into him just because I play those overall competitions, and batting average is something that I'm chasing pretty early on. Again, like even with Robles, like I like him a lot where he's going, but I also don't find myself getting him that often recently, because I'd rather have a guy like a Tim Anderson or somebody like that. And I'd rather target some of the infield positions earlier on. But yeah, I can see why people like him a lot, but I also think there's a concern in the underlying power metrics and whether he's able to get to kind of that next level because of the limited exit velocity.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. I think that Baby Jays are going to be very exciting in the future, but there is still work to be done, right? Obviously, their rotation is not much to look at, but there's good things ahead for Toronto. I think right before we came on, they did draft another stud, Martin. Don't quote me on that.
Did they get Austin Martin?
Don't quote me on that.
Martin, shortstop. Yeah,
they did get him.
Wow.
So how about that infield right there? That could be very exciting, right?
Yeah, I mean, he was supposed to go number 2. He was Keith Law's number 1 pick overall. So he just kept on dropping. That's really interesting.
So I found some really interesting information, anecdotal information on this next player, Garrett Hampson, just as we were preparing for this podcast. I'm very excited to see where this goes. The general take, I believe, me and Ben have talked about several times, he had a blistering September, struggled the other 5 months. Toby, where are you on Garrett Hampson, ADP of 183?
Garrett Hampson's a little bit of a tough one for me with the NLDH coming in. I think there's some value there, but not where he's going right now. I'm not that interested just because of the other guys. He did have a good September, but when you look at the actual numbers, he's just not a very good hitter. So he's pretty much exclusively a Coors guy for me. And then he's on the wrong side of the split, the platoon split, being a right-handed hitter. I do like some of the position flexibility that he gives you. And obviously the speed is a huge boon, but it's so hard to trust the Rockies and what they do with minor leaguers. They just never give guys chances. That spending that type of a pick, I'd much rather wait a little bit and get a Dansby Swanson 40 picks later or something like that, who may not have the same floor ceiling, but I know is probably going to be a better hitter overall in the majors. And I've already seen some progress from him. So I think Hampson definitely gets a boost in value because of the NLDH and the fact that there's more room for playing time. But I just don't see him getting enough playing time to be that valuable, especially there.
Dansby Swanson, I don't remember. Dansby was 40 picks later.
Yeah, he's 220, something like that.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I forgot about
we both like Swanson a lot. That's why he's.
That's crazy. I totally forgot about. Hampson for me is just a no-go for the playing time issue alone almost, and then you factor in some of the, I think his barrel rate was 4.3 or something. Just it was worse than Robles, and he's got the speed, but and I don't think the Rockies really had the propensity to run as much. Do they as some other teams?
Not necessarily.
It's a good question. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, history wouldn't really show that. I mean, Blackman was the only guy getting it done there in Colorado for a long time.
But you got some other guys. David Dahl. I guess he's got some injury risk, but you got some other guys that could run, and they just didn't seem to do that much. I'm way out on Hampson for a number of reasons. But I want to hear this anecdotal evidence.
Let me just give you some numbers.
I just want to be rich.
Garrett Hampson in the first half. Garrett Hampson in the first half, terrible. 200, 239, 285, 524 OPS. Now in the second half, 284, 348, 462 with an 809 OPS. Now it was very much lifted from this scorching September. But when you look into it, when you look a little closer, it was 2 weeks. Okay. If we go September 18th and on September 18th, this is when he started running a little wild. And I looked into his game logs on Baseball Reference. September 18th, he faced Noah Syndergaard. 2 stolen bases. Okay. From then on, he had 4 home runs and 6 stolen bases from September 18th on. But this is where it gets kind of interesting. If you want to create an argument for Garrett Hampson, this is where it gets interesting. Now, granted, it was all on the road at Dodgers and at the Giants. He hit his home runs off of Clayton Kershaw, who gave up 3 that day. September 22nd, Dinger, Hyun-Jin Ryu, who doesn't give up home runs. September 24th, Dinger, Mad Bum. So he's literally hitting bombs all of the sudden. Did he just get pissed off September 18th?
All lefties too.
All lefty. I was going to say all left-handed hitters.
And just went for it. He just went mad in those last 2 weeks that everyone's talking about. That's inflated his ADP. I did find the names very interesting. On the road, at Oracle, and at LA.
Well, and that's kind of how I felt about Victor Robles too. I think his performance in the postseason really gave him some helium going into the offseason as well on some of that. But now Toby's brought up some really good points about some of the nuances that a lot of people I didn't really know or care about his max exit velocity until today. For me, that still doesn't justify the ADP. But that's interesting on Hampson. It's in
case the listeners aren't privy to the Noah Syndergaard note, he is widely known as one of the easiest guys to get a bag
to the plate. Yeah.
Right. So that's what I found on Garrett Hampson. I found that very interesting when I finally ducked into those game logs.
I'm still blown away by his ADP. I forgot all about that. I didn't realize that was that high.
Toby, that's all we really have for today. Let's talk about what you guys have going forward. What's ahead for Toby? What's ahead for Batflip in the future?
Yeah, I think just continue to follow me on Twitter at BatFlipCrazy. Haven't been providing a ton of content recently, just given everything that's happening in the world. It seems minuscule in importance, but I will continue to do that. Best place to listen to my stuff is just my podcast. That's where I provide kind of the most in-depth analysis. I do every Monday with Bubba for Bubba and the Batflip. So we do that every Monday night. We record it and normally shows up late on Monday on the West Coast, early Tuesday on the East Coast. So listen to that. And then when the season starts, then I'll start doing kind of shorter podcasts, but just getting into a little bit of depth in what I'm seeing with some of the players and some potential skill growth, things of that nature. Also have a YouTube channel. If you just YouTube Batflip Crazy, it should show up there. I just post videos occasionally. Again, those have kind of gone on hiatus for the next little bit. But once we know what we're getting with the season, then I'll start to put some more content out on there and you'll see a lot more from me. But the best place is always Twitter. And I'm always happy to engage, answer questions, share your perspective on things that I share. It's always a lot of fun. I get a lot of enjoyment out of that.
Well, thank you very much for being here. This is how that all happened. We've engaged with the YouTube channel. I reached out to you. I know you were doing that. Is there any goal for the YouTube channel? Is this something you want to get started?
Oh, man. Goals. Actually, I love what you guys are doing. I'm thinking about getting a StreamYard account and just recording the podcast through that as well, just to give people another venue to listen to that and what's happening there. I would just like to do more video content. And so, it does take a lot of work. So I'm just working through it. To be honest with you, I don't have a grand plan of how I'm thinking this out. I just love it. And I always have to balance the amount of analysis I do versus the fantasy baseball that I play. Cause I'm in a ton of leagues. I'll probably be in I was going to be in probably 17 or 18 leagues, including at least 10 that have fab. And so it takes a lot, and a lot of them are high stakes leagues. And so, I need to be investing a lot in that, but I love the community and I love sharing information and engaging in those conversations. So that's always kind of the dynamic that I'm battling with, as well as my 3 and 6 year old, and making sure I spend some QT with them as well while I'm doing that.
Sure.
Yeah.
But I love your podcast. I love what you're doing with Bubba. You guys just do such a great job. Me and Ben get on here and just start geeking. We get all excited and we struggle. And then later we talk about all the stuff that we forgot to say. You and Bubba do such a great job articulating your points. Okay. Thank you for that. I very much enjoy it. Ben, do you have anything signing off?
No. Thanks a lot, Toby. I really appreciate indulging us and our listeners. And man, it's a pleasure and a privilege, man. You articulating is you're very good at that. We are not.
Don't sell yourself short. I forgot to say too. You mentioned Mad Bum. I got my shirt on right here.
Oh, how about
go
it?
Get it out of the ocean.
How about it?
I'm not even a Dodgers fan, man. I can't stand the Dodgers.
That was a great interaction with those. Baseball needs more of that edginess with those personal player rivalries, man. I love it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think hopefully when baseball starts back up, we'll have more of an investment in promoting the players and the personalities in the game.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much talent right now. It's just an unbelievable level of talent, and we need more engagement like that. That's what drives interest, like those types of competitions, player to player, team to team. I love it. So hopefully we'll see more of that for sure. And again, I really appreciate all the kind words, and it's been awesome to join you guys tonight.
Thank you again. Thanks for listening to Open Bar Dudes Fantasy Baseball Podcast. You can follow Toby. If I'm sure if you're following us, you're already following Toby. But let's face it. But it's at BatFlipCrazy on Twitter and YouTube as well. And then he does the show with Bubba, Batflip and Bubba. Thanks for listening.
Thanks a lot, man.
Of course. Fun.